pleasure to have you on the program. You always make such interesting programs that I had to have you on to discuss the issue of Scott Young, this guy here who has completely been found guilty, pleaded guilty to his crime, and this week got a very, very harsh sentence. Laila, I'm sure you've heard about it. A 1-year conditional sentence, which includes, of all things, a curfew. Can you think of a more just sentence?
For Scott, I think, the only thing that was just in that was the fact that he chose to make a statement on the courthouse afterwards, and I think really revealed so much of his personality, and a pity that he probably doesn't realize how he came across in that statement. That's the only thing just about that, is that he sort of exposed a little bit of his inner personality in that little bit of a debacle on the courthouse steps.
Wait a minute. Are you implying that Scott Young might not know what he's doing?
Well, I don't know. From the feedback I've heard through my website, a lot of people were kind of shocked at his statement. The fact that he said that, he'd always maintained his innocence for the 4 charges that were stayed. And, obviously he's been cleared and the court saw that, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it seemed like he really thought that, there had been no harassment, that there was no breach of conditions or no breach of order. And I mean, where that came from, I don't know. I don't know if he was in the same trial that everybody else seems to be watching, but he's got his own idea of what happened with those charges, that's for sure.
Yeah, on the courthouse steps, he says, clearly what's demonstrated here today is that the initial 4 charges, including harassment, has absolutely no substance to them. I'm with you. I think they were stayed for a much different reason, don't you?
Oh, definitely. My understanding is that there was a deal cut, and this is from an inside source who says that there was a deal cut, and that the deal is that in order for the guilty plea to be entered, that the 4 charges would be stayed. And I mean, that happens all the time in the judicial system. They say, okay, well, you plead guilty to this charge, and we'll stay the lesser charges, because really the penalty for the lesser charges is nil to nothing. And so to get the guilty plea on the more aggressive charge is what they were going for in that case.
Now, I want to talk about this conditional sentence. I mean, what did you think was an appropriate sentence for what Scott Young admitted to doing?
Well, conditional sentence, and I know that we had talked about this briefly. This is something that, I've had a little bit of personal experience in. I personally don't think the conditional sentence should ever be used in application of domestic assault or domestic abuse cases. And the reason being this, is that a conditional sentence is just that. You complete the conditions of your sentence, and basically your record of that charge is wiped clean. So once he's done his probationary period, the 18 months, and he's been a good boy, if he, sticks to his curfew, he doesn't drink, he doesn't do drugs, he doesn't have any weapons, he doesn't break, the peace anyway, then he won't have a record of this incident. So now, in the psychological report, it says that he is a moderate risk to future partners. A moderate risk. That means, to me, moderate forest fire, conditions. That means there's a pretty good chance that this might happen again. There's a certainty that this may be a possibility, or that this is a possibility in the future. So say down the road, hypothetically, somebody who was given a conditional sentence for domestic assault completes their sentence, gets the record wiped clean, they meet someone down the road who isn't aware of their past, they develop a relationship, some sort of turmoil within the relationship ensues, the offender repeats the same offense, in other words, maybe he beats up the wife, beats up the girlfriend, whatever. When that second charge down the road goes into the court system, they cannot bring anything from this case forward. So if Scott Young were to repeat this mistake with another woman down the road, and everything was done from this case, the 18 months is done, the 12 months is done, they will not be able to use this case to establish a pattern of behavior for the next case down the road. So really, it doesn't protect women in the future, and why they use it in domestic assault, I don't know, because most men who beat women or are abusers, it tends to be a repetitive thing. It's very rare that it's a one-off case, heat of the moment. It's, something that there was a pattern established.
So you're telling me that it's possible then that Scott Young could, in fact, will he have no criminal record or just not a record of this particular incident?
Well, a conditional discharge means that, if he's got a conditional sentence, this record of this incident is gone. Once he's done, once he's completed, that's the conditions, right? You complete the conditions and you're going to be a good boy. There's not going to be any lasting record of it, and they won't be able to use it to apply to any similar cases down the road.
So the condition.
So if this were to happen to if this were to happen to another woman down the road in the same situation, they wouldn't be able to look back at this case and say, oh, well, he's done it before. Look at this charge then, because it's a conditional sentence. It's probably, his record's going to be wiped clean.
Right. See, I'm not a legal expert, so I'll defer to your opinion on the matter. But I thought that the conditional sentence meant that if he abided by all the correct things, he wouldn't go to jail. So you're telling me now is that, I mean, what is the punishment for not? What if he fails? What happens then?
Now, I'll tell you where my experience lies in this. My ex-spouse, we were common law, but this exact situation happened to me. Now, I'm no legal expert by far, so I'm going on my experience and the experience of people that I've assisted, through my employment in the past as a housing director. But in terms of domestic assault, what happens is that they're very expensive cases. There's a lot of investigation. A lot of times women are afraid, so women back out, blah, blah, blah. What's come to pass is that the Crown decides if there's a likelihood of prosecution. If they decide there's a likelihood of prosecution, then they'll recommend the charges and everything goes forward to a trial. Now, what they do with a lot of the domestic assault offenders is they route them through counseling. So they'll say, okay, this is first offense, what was the circumstances, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, let's go to counseling. If it was a really bad offense, they might, ask for a psychiatric evaluation.
Right.
But they'll say, and this is what happened with my ex, is he abused me. We went through the court system. Charges were laid. He was evaluated under a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatric evaluation showed at the time, and I didn't find this out till years later, that he was an extremely high risk for reoffending, that they felt that this was definitely going to be happening again, that counseling was not going to be merited or worthy even in his case because he didn't believe in what he called the mind rape of psychology. And so somehow the Crown and the lawyers agreed that he should go through counseling. He did. He was a good boy. He completed his probationary period. And as a result of completing all the conditions of his sentence, the record of that incident of assault against myself was wiped off his record.
Wow.
Now what happened is a few years later, he assaulted me again. It was in a very public place. It took place in front of hundreds of people in a very busy mall in the middle of a Sunday afternoon back to school shopping. And he was such a psycho nut bar in this incident that nobody would even come forward and give a statement because he scared the people who saw what he did. That's how scary he was. What happened was, the cops interviewed me, are you afraid? Are you this? We go through the whole interview process. They did initially recommend charges. He was held overnight, and then the next day he was released on bail. When it all went back to court, they found that the likelihood of prosecution was probably not going to be very high because, as that Crown said, this was his first incident. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was dealing with victim services and the Crown Counsel. So this isn't his first incident. He had this other incident that happened a few years ago. He completed his conditions. He was given a conditional discharge. And that's what happened. His record was wiped clean. And because of that first incident, the complete record of that incident was wiped clean legally. They were not allowed to bring it into the second case that I was involved in to show that there had been a prior history, in which case, had they been allowed to do that, he would have faced a more severe penalty the second time around. But unfortunately, that happens with a lot of women